This is a fallen angel that I made over 10 years ago, and today I'm going to be reviving my childhood project by kitbashing a new fallen dark angel by using this combat patrol. This is Cursed Crusader Arts. This little trip down memory lane all started with a phone call when the boss called me to ask if I wanted anything from the Warhammer store. With a million ideas that typically need 3 different boxes of different bits, I was bamboozled beyond all comprehension. Finally, after getting her to essentially do a stocktake of the entire store, it came down to a close call between the Dark Angels and Black Templars combat patrols, with some plans for crazy grimdark experimentations.
I don't think you really deserve this.
In the end, I went with the former, explaining that I could turn them into fallen angels and therefore I wouldn't have to learn how to paint black armor.
What the hell you say? I raised a donut.
It was very clear that I would have to do a little kit bashing and take a few liberties here and there, but I had a clear vision in mind to bring this little childhood project back into the modern day. I started with the Intercessor Sergeant, who would, in this case, be a Chaos Champion. I got the core parts first. Legs, torso, arms and the power pack all laid out and examined them thoroughly. These models were very different to the ones that I used to build, and they had all kinds of extra armor plates and details on them. Now rumour has it that the Fallen are little more than scavengers after 10,000 years of being chased around by their brothers in the Imperium of Man. With this information and very little knowledge about any restrictions that Primaris armour may have, I decided that it wouldn't be so far-fetched that the Fallen would run off with the armour off of the backs of their Primaris enhanced siblings, resulting in them wearing green armour. So I carved away with my very blunt knife to remove some of the extra armour plates on the legs and arms, stripping them down to their base levels. Additionally, I cut away the gorget and the knee pads and then drilled some bullet holes to show how the Fallen don't really have any access to forge worlds to manage their gear and thus show the impact of 10,000 years on the run. The next big project was the power pack. I wanted to add something that made them look a little more chaotically aligned than simply having dark angels with black cloaks. Chaos Marines make their silhouette look larger by having these extensions on their power packs, so I decided to include that on my model too. Perhaps the Fallen decided to borrow from some Chaos Marines too. With the main body and power pack ready to go, I needed to look at some of the details and the weapons that my champion was going to use. There was no way I was not going to give this Fallen Knight a power sword from the upgrade sprues that come with the combat patrol box, so that was an easy decision to make. I also shaved down the edges of the sword to make it look sharper. I have no idea what possessed me to make this unnecessary modification, but whilst I was doing it I took the time to shave off the little energy linking power thing that the power swords usually have. For the other arm, I was spoiled for choice. I no longer play the game, so my decisions were based from an aesthetic and story based position, and the combat patrol kit has so many cool arm poses and options available to use. I chose to use this arm with the bolt pistol raised and ready whilst the bolt gun, or bolt rifle, hung from the arm. I saw an opportunity here to add to the story of exiled scavengers that were low on supplies, so I clipped off the scope, making them resort to using iron sights. I also decided to cut off the magazine to the rifle, and then attempted to carve out a hole that would sell the idea that our champion has run out of ammunition for his main weapon, and as a result has to resort to his sidearm. From here on, it was a case of getting a head suitable for our leader, adding some pouches and the tilt shield for extra detail. I made the shoulder pads particularly damaged and cut the Imperial Eagle off of one, replacing it with a reliquary instead to limit the number of Imperial regalia on the armour. Then I had a great idea that turned into 2 hours of horrifying and fiddly work. I wanted my Fallen to have some skull trophies, and I wasn't about to put them on spikes, because for some reason I thought that spikes were too chaotic, even though they were going to have Chaos Stars painted on them, so that doesn't really make any sense.
He's stupid.
Anyway, I cut off 4 skulls from the box of skulls and cleaned them of all mould lines, and then began the task of drilling a hole through each one. I tried to put the holes in different positions and angles so that they would all sit differently once threaded together. That was the part that took so long, the threading together. After far too much time had passed, the skulls were finally attached to the string, and I began to wrap the excess around the pipes that I had glued onto the power pack, creating a nice little trophy to show that these aren't no Imperial lapdogs anymore. Finally, I finished up the damage by roughing up the armor with scratches, and I don't mean 1 or 2 scratches. I really messed this thing up. This was done in the hope that dry brushing would catch the edges and washes would sink into them to make these marines look more haggard and worn down. I supported this by applying some Armageddon dust in certain areas to add layers of muck, dust and grime that can be painted to reflect whatever kind of damage or corrosion we feel like doing when we paint the miniature. Take another look, specifically at the legs and the sword-bearing arm. Do these pieces work together? The answer is clearly no, but why is this the case? It's because the legs are a dynamic piece, creating a sense of movement as if the character is leaning back from the recoil of his weapon. Now look at the sword arm. Is it dynamic? Does it create a sense of movement and energy? No, this piece is static. The sword is held in a relaxed grip with the point resting on the ground. This suggests that our character is at ease and is in no rush to move around, creating a weird feeling in our minds as to what our miniature is doing. So how do we fix this? How do we learn from my terrible mistake? Well, we try again. We've already identified what is wrong and why it's wrong. So let's build ourselves a new fallen angel so that we can compare them at the end. I start off by building up 4 more sets of legs. Citadel has designed them to be monoposed, giving each miniature its own personality and stance. By building these, I have a visual reminder of how each will impact the overall miniature, and it will also let me physically dry fit the pieces against the torso to see what it would look like when they're put together. This time I decided to create a melee specialist, dual wielding combat knives. So I picked out and cleaned up all the pieces I would need, including the knife wielding right arm, its sheath, and a shoulder pad. This arm is going to remain in its original form, stabbing down on the enemy, with the legs suggesting that he's lunging forwards. Now, there isn't a knife wielding left arm, so we're going to have to get creative and make our own. First of all, I put the other pieces of the model together. This included some chainmail from an old Chaos Space Marine torso, I made another anvilus pattern power pack, and finally I attached the sheathed combat knife to the Fallen Angel's belt. This knife is going to tell us exactly where the hand is going to be, because I envision him drawing the knife in a fast and seamless move, even as he strikes with the other one. The first thing to do is to cut off the hand that we want to be drawing the knife. If we look at it in its original form, it's being used to signal to his squad mates. But we don't want that, so cut off his hand and add him to the growing ranks of handless Skywalkers.
Oh, I hate you.
Meanwhile, the other arm is going to be divided into 3 segments: the shoulder, the upper arm, and the forearm. What we're doing is taking advantage of the ball joints to angle the arm into a new but realistic pose. As you dry fit the pieces together, drill holes through the pieces at the correct angles and feed a piece of wire through it. This will not only help you line up the whole limb, but also reinforce the bond when you glue it together. By the end of it all, you can see that the hand rests nicely on the hilt of the combat knife, and the shoulder is just about in the correct position. It might look a little strange and out of proportion, but once you put the giant shoulder pad on, it will cover up most of it anyway, and sell the illusion. And just like that, you've transformed your Space Marine into something unique that will draw in the eyes of anyone around. And you've learnt the first steps into reposing your miniatures. The Dark Angels. First Legion of the Adeptus Astartes is constantly held back by their hubris of pride. They keep hidden their greatest shame, not only from the Imperium itself, but also from their own younger battle brothers. The enigmatic Inner Circle often wear hooded robes, concealing much of a Space Marine's helmet or face, and today I'm going to show you how you can make your own hooded robes for your Space Marine army. Bottom muslin is much like cheesecloth, except it has a tighter weave. This helps to keep everything to the same scale as the miniature, whilst also providing a heavy and textured cloak, as opposed to the smoother plastic cloaks that we typically see with our miniatures. Next, I'll set up some PVA glue and mix it with a generous amount of water. We need a runny liquid that flows quite freely, so that it can penetrate through the muslin entirely, without clogging up all the holes. Whilst you're doing this, it's useful to have some references of miniatures with hoods so that you can see the different layers. Typically, Space Marines will have an inner robe like what we see with the Blade Guard veterans, and then the outer cloak like the ones we typically see on our heroes, like the captains. We can choose to do these separately or combine different elements of both depending on what kind of look we're after. I started by making the hood for my melee specialist, and I experimented with using multiple layers of muslin to create a smoother texture. I cut out several small squares of material, layering them on top of one another. I then brushed the glue on the front and back, combining them into a single unit. This is then placed on the Space Marine's helmet. However, I found that these extra layers created a thick and bulky hood that is quite difficult to manipulate and shape. This was especially evident when trying to touch the edges of the hood beneath the gorget or the collar of the armour. I've kept this hood for demonstration, but you can easily remove this and start again, layering and manipulating the cloth until you have a result that you're happy with. Following this, I work on the robes around the chest and the outer cloak. In hindsight, it may have been easier to do this before gluing the power pack onto the back of the Space Marine, so keep this in mind as it can get quite fiddly. I cut out a rectangle of material, roughly the same height as the Space Marine. This is then cut down the middle, and the two loose ends will go around the power pack and over the shoulders, creating the robe that comes around the front of the miniature. Painting on some PVA will help secure the fabric in place, and then you can come in with the pokey tool to tidy up any loose ends and make the edges rounder and more crisp. But if you found this video helpful and learned something, like the video and let me know in the comments how I did. I've got a few more projects lined up too, so subscribe to help the channel grow and get notified when I release another video. Moving on to the Sergeant, or in my case, the Champion, it's a case of repeating the process. This time I only used a single layer of muslin for the hood and spent more time manipulating it. I tried to give the hood an overhang to conceal more of the face, drawing inspiration from Cypher so that the character has an air of mystery around him. Then the rest of the robe and cloak used the same method as before. As I apply the glue to the miniature, consider the pose and actions of the character. Should an arm be concealed or exposed? Is there going to be wind involved, creating a billowing cloak? Or are you in an icy tundra, like Fenris, where cloaks are saturated with moisture and hang down heavily as they begin to freeze? Having all the cloaks on your miniatures acting in the same way is an excellent way to create a sense of uniformity across the squad and even entire armies. Whilst the glue is wet, you can use the pokey tool to move and manipulate the muslin, creating folds and lumps to give the inclination to billowing cloaks or folds on a robe. You can see how I also use this tool to tuck in many of the loose threads, because I don't want my Fallen to look completely beaten and tattered. I believe that they would still have the same pride as their loyal brothers, perhaps even more after the influence of Chaos. However, I do leave some odds and ends loose, and I'm also quite happy to leave some areas to look damaged or irregular, as the chances of fully repairing their robes are quite low. Once your cloaks have been attached, leave them to dry for a few hours until they are hard. If you have used multiple layers of fabric, I would suggest leaving them to dry overnight just to be sure. Then, afterwards, take some time to trim the edges with your scissors or a hobby knife to create enough room to attach the remaining limbs and correct any mistakes. Then you can apply additional layers of muslin without undoing your work. Or perhaps add extra details such as chains and tilt shields that would lie on the outside of your cloak. This is an excellent way to transform your miniatures and is only one of several ways to make cloaks for your Space Marines. You can transfer this knowledge to any army, using multiple layers for smoother and heavier looks, or a single layer with loose strands to look thinner and more ragged. It looks especially good when you use the muslin over a plastic cloak, adding that extra layer of depth and texture, perfect for your grimdark adventures. I did it! For years I've dreamed of some epic Dark Angels Fallen based on this picture. We've built, converted, broken and scavenged our way to making these two Primaris intercessors true Dark Angels. With the proper iconography and homemade cloaks, these renegades need nothing more than a lick of paint. So join me as I show you how to paint these green Fallen Dark Angels. This is Cursed Crusader Arts. Some people were concerned with the massive number of scratches I put on these Space Marines, as well as the usual battle damage. This often boils down to personal preference, but I'm looking for a beaten and rugged look. Once the Chaos Primer is in place, we can paint on our first layers of Incubi Darkness, and then War Flesh. We will see how most of these tiny scratches are filled by the paint, leaving an uneven surface. This was the plan all along, and this will set our intercessors apart from the other smoothed armoured Space Marines that we typically see on the battlefield. The next stage of our armour is to add some degree of light reflection by mixing Warflesh with Warboss green and layering it on the upper sections of the armour panels. The shade of green is a little off, displaying too much of a yellow hue from the previous layer, but we're going to fix this shortly. For now, let's address the metals. I use true metals here, so I begin with lead belcher. This is applied to the armour trim, blades, chains, and also the casings of any bolt rifles the miniature may have. Reinforce this with a layer of iron breaker to the top surfaces where we want the light to be the brightest. With this done, we can now fix our green. This is the most exciting and satisfying part of the paint job. When I finished this stage, I was hit with a wave of nostalgia, and comparing the new minis to my old ones, the green is almost identical. So here it is, the super complex stage that transforms these Fallen from wannabe pretenders to true exiles of the First Legion.
What? Here, look. No, I am forbidden to look upon.
Slap the heaviest and most indiscriminate wash of Bale Tan Green over everything. Armour, metal, chains, and trims. Everything gets hit with green juice. Wait for this to dry, but look at the armour. Look how the Warboss green is stained with the new filter, pushing the yellow hue back and allowing that deep Dark Angel's green to show. We're going to finish the armour now. Take some more Warboss green, but thin it down this time and stipple it over the highest and brightest areas of the armour. The stippling motion is going to create tiny dots that will help create more texture in our miniature, and help all those tiny scratches with creating the illusion of minor battle damage, enhancing the bigger chunks that have been blown out of the armour. Use this as an opportunity to also highlight any edges you think will have been hit by the light. Once this is done, apply a standard wash of Bale Tan Green to the upper areas where you stippled the previous one. Then wash the lower and darkest sections with either Agrax Earthshade or Nuln Oil. The choice is yours, depending on what kind of lighting and shadow you want. Our armour is now just about complete and ready to hit the battlefield. When I first made my original Fallen, I had envisioned them as something like assassins, using toxins and poisons to overwhelm their enemies as they use the shadows to their advantage. This is why our metals have been washed green. It's more of a personal touch. I highlight the very edges with Stormhost Silver, but I use this sparingly as it's very intense and it can be difficult to push the colour back with washes without ruining the rest of the other layers. You can then decide if you want to add a wash of Nuln Oil. I don't do this to the blades, but I do use it for any other metal sections, such as the chainmail or the pipes on the Champion's power pack. The lore-accurate Fallen from before the Horus Heresy had all of their iconography painted red, and this is something that I've kept with this design, especially as it goes well with the red Chaos Star that we see on our original source of inspiration. First, I go over this with Corax White. This is what I had to hand, but any white or pale yellow will do the job nicely. This will shine through our red paints, making them seem brighter and more intense. Layer on Mephiston Red, and then do the same with Evil Sun's Scarlet. With the bright reds in place, I use 2 thin washes of Nuln Oil to let the details pop and allow us to see the individual wings on the iconography. When this is dry, I pick out the details with a mixture of Evil Sun Scarlet and Corax White, before finishing it with a final highlight of Evil Sun Scarlet. Our Fallen Angels are close to completion, leaving only small details behind. Part of the kit bashing process had me add several skulls. These were painted with a base coat of Mournfang Brown, and was followed up with thin layers of Zandri Dust and then Flayed One Flesh, each time picking out only the brightest spots and details. I then use a wash of Seraphim Sepia for the brighter sections, and then Agrax Earthshade for the darker areas. With the bones completed, all that's left to do is the one thing that you've all been waiting for: the cloaks. Our homemade cloaks are made with muslin, so it works a little differently to the plastic moulded ones that we're used to. However, for these minis, the cloaks will be black, so it's not too difficult to work with. I mix up a grey solution of Corax White and Abaddon Black and dry brush this over a majority of the cloak. The most important part here is that the paint or the brush itself isn't too wet, as we don't want to fill in all of the holes in the muslin. This will help us maintain the depth and natural detail that the muslin provides. A second dry brush of the same mixture but with a little more Corax White is applied, but only to the higher surfaces, again where we expect the light to hit. Make sure to let this dry fully to prevent the paint from running into the depths of the fabric. Once the paint is dry, wash this with Nuln Oil to push back the bright grey. We need the cloak to look black as if it's reflecting light, rather than looking grey that's a little dirty. You may find that you need more than one wash to finish the job, but once you've let it dry, you can now add any chaos sigils to it using the same method as the red iconography. And then you're done. Except you're not. The model is truly spectacular. Anyone who knows me knows that I crave a grimdark experience. I apply a generous amount of ground charcoal to the base and the lower panels of the armour. I've harvested this from a local fire pit and I grind it down, but you can do this with a black dry pastel and grind it to dust for the same effect. Focus this on the armour where the shadows are greatest and also on the cloak where the folds are deepest. You can then secure it by applying a generous amount of isopropyl alcohol, and while it's wet, we're going to create some mud. I have a contact powder that is supposed to resemble brake dust and rust, but as I was playing around with it, I found that it made an excellent mud effect when it mixes with the alcohol. Apply this only to the base, feet, and lower sections of the cloak to make it look dirty and heavy. Doing this means that we don't need to resort to rust effects, as I believe the prideful nature of the First Legion will not allow them to let their war gear rust. Once this is dry, if you find it too bright, a wash of Agrax Earthshade or Nuln Oil will darken it down, and with that, our fallen angels are finally complete. It's a little different to the lore-accurate Fallen that we're familiar with. Mine do not sport the black pre-heresy armour, and I have allowed them to stray off the Emperor's path and into the waiting arms of chaos. But they ooze character, and I believe the force of these would draw the attention of many passers-by. Last month, I released a video about using storytelling to improve your kitbashing skills, and I thought it was going to be a flop.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
Anyway, within the comments you guys had a lot to say about your own personal projects, ranging from an impossibly huge Imperial Guard army where every model is unique, to a wolf lord whose favourite puppy has become some kind of weird servo skull. Now, while I was glorifying in these reports of creative bursts of insanity, I came across a comment about Primaris and Firstborn miniatures, which quickly became a short but very interesting discussion. So after being delivered this interesting little side quest, I decided I had to really see if it's possible to repose one of these monoposed miniatures. This is Cursed Crusader Arts. So here's the plan. I want to add a new member to my growing ranks of heretical fallen angels. But this one's going to be based off a Blade Guard veteran. This big boy runs around all day with a sword and a shield and occasionally reminds people that he also has a big gun. But the miniature is designed in a way that doesn't really give much room to modify it. Unfortunately, the soon-to-be Chaos Marine has forgotten that although I may be a filthy heretic, my brain has the functionality of a mildly competent orc. So here's the rules. Number 1. The core parts must come from the same Blade Guard veteran. Number 2. The miniature cannot have more than 3 parts from other miniatures. This includes 3D printed pieces, and this is also before decorating him as a heretic. And rule number 3, the miniature must be significantly reposed. So I'm going to give it my best shot, and then you can decide for yourself just how much Primaris models can actually limit you. To start this project, I want to get a feel for how the model looks originally, and I suggest you do the same with your projects too, especially if you've not built it before. Blue tack is our best friend, so I'm going to dry fit this Blade Guard veteran just so that we can see how the pieces are supposed to connect to one another, and then I can get an idea of what I want to do with it. This particular model is holding the hilt of his sword inside the scabbard and would either be pointing or shooting some kind of weapon with a strong stance. The first thing I notice is that all three of these Blade Guard veterans pretty much use the same stance regardless of what the rest of their body is doing. So this is one thing that I want to change. And to help me get an idea of what I want to do, I'm going to build a narrative in my head. So this fallen angel has been in a duel and he's been injured. He's been forced to his knees and he's holding his wound, and yet he's still quite defiant, trying to get back onto his feet so that he can fight again. The bulk of our conversion will be focused on the legs. Dropping him to his knees will be quite the challenge, given the number of details included on the sculpt.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
To begin working on the legs, we must first cut them off of the main body, and luckily, this has been split in half. The front section of the torso has the knee pads barely hanging onto the tabards, which makes them easy to remove, and we can then place them back onto the model later on without too much trouble. Meanwhile, the back part of the body has the main parts of the legs, and these need to be cut away carefully both at the knees and the hips, being careful not to damage the additional details too much. I also want to retain as much of the original armor pieces as possible, so I try to keep all of the cuts in the ribbed sections between the joints, and later on we can replace this with green stuff and milliput. Now once these legs are removed, we have something more akin to the 2007 era of miniatures where our models are composed of a separate torso, legs, head and arms. To make our model kneel, we need to remove the hanging section of the tabard. We can make a new one later, so just add the removed section to your bits box for another project. From here on out, it's a simple case of trimming and dry fitting over and over until we can comfortably make the angle that we're looking for. Using blue tack is invaluable for this phase of the project, allowing you to manipulate the pieces without having to commit. But there are two important tricks to making this work. First, cut the model at the joints. Removing the ribbed section from the armour that's found behind the knee and elbows is a great way to get a natural bending point. Refine this by sanding the part down to fit the curved space, and now you can bend the leg or arm however you want, and you can fill the area back in with some green stuff later. Secondly, you must be bold about how much you remove. In some cases, you may only need to trim off a small amount of the model, but in this instance, I had to remove most of the upper left leg in order to get the pose right. This is because our Space Marine is leaning over his leg, and logically the torso would conceal most of the upper leg. This can be quite risky, but I can assure you roughly 70 to 80% of the upper leg was cut away in order for me to make this pose work. If for any reason that you're unsure about trying this out, give it a go on one of your rank and file models. This sacrificial piece is going to give you the practice and confidence that you need so that you can try this on much more interesting and valuable models later on down the line. Moving on to the arms, I want to start with the left side. I start by cutting the tab off of the Blade Guard's arm, giving me a flat surface for the new hand. And then I use some sprue glue to create a bond between the parts which will allow me to angle the hand inwards. But be sure to let this dry and cure fully before making further modifications, or your parts are just gonna fall off. The hand fits perfectly and it's quite believable, but the shoulder is now out of place. We can remove, rotate and reattach the shoulder into the correct angle and fill in the remaining gap. And once all of this is put together, we have completed 3 of the 4 limbs and our piece is beginning to look great. Next, I'm going to pick the head. I could use a helmet, but I want to show just how much pain this fallen angel is in. This head has a brilliant grimace, and the scars on the cheek are going to help tell a story of someone who is constantly getting injured in a cruel, sadistic and unforgiving galaxy. Now, I'm not particularly a fan of the flat top haircut, plus my strain of Fallen a Chaos Heretic, so he's going to go through his midlife crisis a little early, so I'll simply file off his hair and make him bald. Using a pen, I can freely rotate and tilt the head to show different expressions. Lowering his head towards the hand on his stomach will indicate him focusing on the wound. Tilting his head up may suggest that he's glaring and snarling at the enemy who just injured him, but I will be angling his head slightly down and towards the sword, suggesting that he's fighting the pain to get back to his feet once more. To sell this story, we need to find the correct arm. This isn't too difficult, using one from the Blade Guard veterans that we would normally add a sword as shield. The challenge comes from the hands. Many of the hands are tilted up at the wrist when using swords, or half the hand is hidden behind the shields. Furthermore, we will need to flip a sword upside down, which can leave us relying on relatively weak connection points. To overcome this, I'm going to use the spare chainsword from my Captain in Gravis armor that was previously turned into the Plague Hunter. I don't need the chainsword or arm, only the hand and the handle. The fingers are connected to the chainsword handguard, and when I remove it, we lose the front part of the fingers, so I'll need to resculpt these later. After separating the sword blade, the hand, and the chainsaw hilt, it's time to drill our holes for the pin that will hold it together. There is no room for error, so the trick here is to take it slow and make sure the drill bit is as straight as you can get it. Once glued together, we have our sword held in a reverse grip. Now, just as a little side note, be sure to cut off the end of the sword blade, somewhere around halfway up, so you can sell the image of the sword being driven into the ground. This will ensure that your model is flush to the ground and not leaning in the wrong direction. Finish off by setting the arm in place, add the pauldron, tilt shield and power pack, and you're all done. Our model is fully converted and ready to be painted, so let's just check back on our rules. Are all of the core components of the model still from the same Blade Guard veteran we started with? Did we use more than 3 parts from any other kits? Are there any 3D printed parts? Is the pose significantly different from what we started with? Hopefully this will have given you some ideas on how you can make massive alterations to your miniatures, even if it seems that the current kits are restrictive. In reality, the only limitations are the ones that you create in your head. So how far are you willing to go? What is it that you're willing to do to your models, and how much time are you willing to spend on them? Because in truth, the models have never been better, and you now have access to potentially unlimited poses. Granted, not everybody will want to do this with the rank and file soldiers of their army, but I urge you to give it a shot for your elite units and leaders, making them stand out as phenomenal centerpieces of your army. But whatever you do, make things have fun. Oh, did you think I'd forgotten? Small additional changes will make this model a Chaos Marine. As usual, I'll be extending the arms of the power pack, this time using tubes made with green stuff and reinforced with a paper clip. Then, the vents will be given that extra chaotic touch by adding some Tyranid spikes onto each one. A trophy spike is going to restore some of the height lost by making the Space Marine kneel. I wrap a small length of wire around it just to remove some of the tidy and ordered look. To help sell the pose, I add another Dark Angel's reliquary to the trophy rack, and a skull to the left pauldron. I take particular care to angle these in the same direction, as the model is leaning to show the pull of gravity. The right pauldron simply has short lengths of wire embedded into it. Perhaps this Space Marine will add more skulls as he continues to wage his war against the Corpse Emperor. Now it's time to prime the model for painting. I'm purposely leaving the cape off until the painting is finished, so that it can be moulded to fit the shape of the new base. But for now, here is a completely reposed Blade Guard veteran converted into a Chaos Fallen Angel. We begin with the body of a Primaris Intercessor, sourced from the Dark Angels Combat Patrol, that has no Dark Angels in it. Now, I'm not doing any reposing of the miniature this time, so I want to make the most of what we already have. He's moving forwards at a steady pace, the back of his left foot raised as he takes another step forward, so let's keep this in mind as the project evolves. In previous Fallen Angel videos, some of you have suggested to make some of these characters look a little bit more chaotic, so I ordered a whole bunch of spare Chaos Marine parts, including heads, arms, weapons and shoulder pads, and we'll be using some of these parts to tell a story about a fallen angel that is slightly more chaotically aligned than his brethren. To start this kitbashed transformation, I'm first attaching a Chaos Marine power pack. Previous Fallen I've built have more ramshackle power packs, modified from loyal Primaris parts into something that's a bit more indicative of the Chaos designs. But there's no need for modifications this time around. There's a nice bit of chaos trim, including the 8-pointed star, which makes it obvious that this Dark Angel is no longer loyal. Next are the weapons, and this time I want a pretty standard looking loadout, picking out a chainsword and a bolt pistol. Taking advantage of the relaxed pose, I want the weapon to be lowered and not currently in use. This arm holds the chainsword out at a slightly wider position, and I dry fit this with a bit of blue tack just to make sure that it fits my vision. However, there is a minor problem that is going to require breaking out my new hobby saw. This other arm doesn't hold the chainsaw out as wide from the body as the other one, so it isn't really suitable for what I'm after, but I find that the chainsword itself is much more fitting. If we refer back to the inspiration of my particular flavour of Fallen, found within the 5th edition Chaos Space Marines Codex, the arrows of the pointed star are a prominent detail. They're all over the armour, weapons and cloaks, and as a result I love this chainsword with the pointed arrow running along the length of the blade. All I have to do is remove the weapons from the arms and swap them around. To do this, I break out the new hobby saw, and after getting it blessed by the Chaos Gods with a suitable sacrifice, the vambraces end in a point, stretching over the wrist and onto the back of the hand, so this isn't going to really give us a clean spot to cut with our saw. So instead I choose to saw off the chainsword blades themselves above the hand which holds the handle. Once both blades have been removed, we can begin reattaching them to the arms that we want to use. This is done by drilling a hole into the chainsaw deep enough to add a paperclip pin with superglue. Once secure, I put a blob of black paint on the end of the pin and press it to the arm, marking the plastic to show where to drill on the other side and ensure that everything lines up correctly. Then I drill the second hole and glue the chainsword blade into the new arm. If there are any gaps, you can always fill this in with putty later. Then I dry fit the reconstructed arm to the body and attach a Dark Angel shoulder pad. For the other arm, we're using a bolt pistol, and I want to give this feeling of the Fallen walking up to a loyalist in order to execute them. First, I pick out an arm that has the correct angle, following a similar mindset to how I picked out the chainsword. The pose is great, but I don't really want an Eye of Horus on the pistol. I feel that it strays a little too far away from the concept of runaway renegades, and leans too much towards the Black Legion ideology. Instead, I pick another pistol with part of the Chaos Star on the body of the weapon, keeping the same themes in place as before. I pin this together in the same way as I did the chainswords previously, and apply another shoulder pad, this time a Chaos one with the 8-pointed star. Finally, it's time for the head, and the spare parts I bought off eBay gave me a few options to choose from. In the end, I went with a horned helmet with the divided faceplate, really leaning into the fallen and corrupted feeling of the model. Then I needed to remove the horns using my hobby knife to give room for the hood. I made sure to preserve as much of the horns as possible so that they can be used in another project. And then I glue all of the parts into place, angling them to get the pose that I want, giving me this. This is our base model, and it's a pretty good kitbashing conversion of a Space Marine that is quite striking. The pieces used were specifically chosen to tell the story that we wanted, making sure to pick parts that fit the pose and show the correct kind of iconography, but we're not done yet. We need to go to the next level and use unconventional tools and materials to make our Chaos Marine really look like a true Fallen Dark Angel. We're beginning with making a bit of a tabard to sit between his legs, and to make this we're using cigarette papers and PVA glue. This material is easily accessible and extremely cheap. I rip up the papers and begin to layer them on top of one another, adding thinned down PVA glue between each layer, using about 6 or 7 pieces. Doing this on some greaseproof paper will make it easier to remove and pick up once it's dry. The reason we do this is so that we can add more detail. The wet paper is going to naturally create folds that are in scale with the material and add some texture variation. Gently push this into place and shape it. Then let it dry. But be careful, the PVA glue alone isn't going to be enough to hold the paper onto the miniature forever. To secure this, add a few drops of superglue along anywhere the paper is in contact with the miniature. This dries fast, secures the new part, and adds a harder layer to prevent it from breaking. Next is the cloak. To add a new texture and be thematic to the concept of a rugged runaway scavenger, we're going to use muslin for our cloaks. Muslin is a fabric that is woven together, often called cheesecloth. We want to see the holes, tears, and loose threads to sell the idea of disorder at a glance from the tabletop. I start off with some scraps that I've prepared in advance. This was done by cutting up strips and fraying them at the edges. Then, I soak them in watered down black acrylic paint and squeeze out the excess water. This means that when we prime our model, any missed strands will look grey or black, blending in with the rest of the miniature when you paint it. Now, to actually apply the muslin, I do it in 2 stages. First the hood, and then the cloak. For the hood, I take a small rectangle and place it over the head. Using an old brush, I apply watered down PVA to help mould the fabric around the surface of the head and tuck in any loose threads. Then I want to push the sides of the hood around, under the power pack, and under the arms. This is going to help us sell the idea of the cloak being a single piece, whilst keeping any excess out of the way. Now, before we move on, I want to give you another tip for making cloaks with muslin. It's produced in many sizes using a measurement known as a thread count, which tells you how tightly the threads are woven together across 1 square inch. When you make your cloaks, if you find that the gaps are too big and noticeable, you can do one of 2 things. You could look for a material with a higher thread count. This means that the threads are more tightly woven together, creating smaller holes. But this could also increase the price of the material, as you'll need to begin looking into other creative hobbies such as cross-stitch. Alternatively, you can layer your muslin. Personally, I overlap 2 layers, making sure that it's lined up in such a way that the holes look smaller, by having the threads of the top layer overlap the holes of the bottom layer. This is fine enough that it isn't too thick, but still looks great while also maintaining the rugged look and keeping the price down. Moving on to making the cloak, you can see me layer up the fabric, gluing them together with the watered down PVA. I've also created an incision that goes at least halfway down the length of the fabric. This is to help you apply the cloak to the miniature by using the separate parts to go around the power pack and let you move them over the shoulders. For this Fallen, I'm just giving him a hooded cloak instead of the whole robe. So I push the fabric around and under the arms to secure it in place, making sure that it ties into the fabric used for the hood. And now we have a Fallen Dark Angel. All that's left are to add more details for visual interest. First, a few extra bits of fabric suggest the attempt to repair their cloaks with whatever usable materials they can find on the battlefield. A tilt shield gives the Fallen Angel a connection to his former chapter and helps to move the miniature farther away from the stock image of a normal Space Marine. Then we can add battle damage, which is created with a hobby knife or a drill, making the armor look well worn and aged, long overdue for a proper repair. And finally, a layer of thinned down liquid green stuff can add extra texture that will show through when you paint the miniature. So here it is with the Chaos Black Primer. This is a great way to unify the entire miniature so that you can see if it needs anything else. You can see that I've created a chain using some hobby wire and various skulls, attaching it to the cloak to show the trophies this Chaos Marine has collected. In my mind, he always knew that he'd never be accepted back into the Dark Angels, and is bitterly jealous of the Redeemed. As a result, this has made him fall further into Chaos than some of the others, and the skulls, in my mind at least, are of other Dark Angels who have been sent to hunt him down. So what do you think? Is this chaosy enough for you? I purposely avoided using mutations as I see these guys more like renegades akin to the Red Corsairs rather than full-on chaos worshippers in the warp surrounded by demonic energy. I still have room for a few more Fallen for this squad, so let me know what you'd like to see next, and whatever you do, make things, have fun, and I'll see you next time on Cursed Crusader Arts.